Hello and welcome to Study with Sri. Here I am covering Indian Polity by M.Laxmikant chapter wise. In previous video, I discussed up to 1892 Indian Council Act. So moving forward to Indian Council Act of 1909. This act is known as Morley-Minto reform. Lord Morley was the Secretary of the State for India and Lord Minto was the Viceroy of India. देखो एस और वी में एस कम्स फर्स्ट, सो मॉर्ले और मिंटो में मॉर्ले कम्स फर्स्ट, सो यू कैन रिमेंबर एज मॉर्ले एज सेक्रेटरी, मिंटो एज वाइसरॉय. नेक्स्ट फीचर्स ऑफ द एक्ट. इट कंसिडरेबली इंक्रीज द साइज ऑफ लेजिस्लेटिव काउंसिल बोथ सेंट्रल एंड प्रोविंशियल. तो ये एक्ट इंक्रीज कर रहा है साइज ऑफ लेजिस्लेटिव काउंसिल कहाँ कहाँ पे, बोथ सेंट्रल एंड provincial. The number of the members in Central Legislative Council was raised from 16 to 60, but the number of members in Provincial Legislative Council was not uniform. Next, it retained official majority in Central Legislative Council, but allowed the Provincial Legislative Council to have non-official majority. Again, I am saying that Central Legislative Council में it retained the official majority, but allowed Provincial Legislative Council में non-official majority. Next, it enlarged the deliberative function of Legislative Council at both the levels. Deliberative functions जो है उसको enlarge कर दिया गया of the Legislative Council at both the levels, that is central and provincial. For example, members were allowed to ask supplementary questions, move resolution on budget and so on. Next, it provided for the first time for association of Indians with the Executive Council. So, ये याद रखना होगा कि it provided for the association of Indians with the Executive Council, not Legislative Council, that is Executive Council of Viceroy and Governors. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council. He was appointed as law member. Next, it introduced a system of communal representation for Muslim by accepting the concept of separate electorate. तो communal representation क्या होता है? Under this, the Muslim members were to be elected only by Muslim voters. Separate electorate create हुआ and Muslim member को vote करेगा only Muslim voters. Thus the act legalized communalism and Lord Minto came to be known as father of communal electorate. It also provided for separate representation of presidency corporation, chambers of commerce, universities and jamindars. So it also provided for the separate representation of Presidency Corporation, Chamber of Commerce, universities and jamindars. Next, moving forward to Government of India Act of 1919. On August 20, 1917, the British government declared for the first time that its objective was gradual introduction of responsible government. Very important, that responsible government. The Government of India Act of 1919 was thus enacted, which came into force in 1921. Very important, after 2 years, the Government of India Act 1919 was came into force. The act is also known as Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. As I have said that, who come first start with S. So, Montagu start with Secretary of the State, Chelmsford start with Viceroy of India. So, the features of the act were as follows. It relaxed the central control over the provinces. Province के ऊपर central का जो control था वो relax कर दिया गया. कैसे? Now, by demarcating and separating the central and provincial subjects. The central and provincial legislature were authorized to make laws on their respective list of the subjects. However, the structure of government continued to be centralized and unitary. Next, it further divided the provincial subject into two parts. One is transferred, another is reserved. Again, I am saying that it further divided the provincial subjects, very important, provincial subjects, not central subjects. The provincial subjects into two parts. One is transferred, another is reserved. The transferred subjects were to be administered by governor with the aid of minister responsible to the legislative council. The reserved subject, of the other hand, were to be administered by governor and his executive council without being responsible to the legislative council. The dual scheme of the governance was known as diarchy, a term derived from Greek word di-arch, which means double rule. However, this experiment was largely unsuccessful. Listen, the features of 1919 Act was ये रिलैक्स किया सेंट्रल कंट्रोल ओवर प्रोविंसेस। कैसे? डिमार्केट कर दिया, सेपरेट कर दिया द सेंट्रल एंड प्रोविंशियल सब्जेक्ट्स को। Central and provincial legislature were authorized to make laws on their respective list of subjects. However, the structure of government continued to be centralized and unitary. Okay? It further divided the provincial subject. Provincial subject को divide कर रहा है transferred and reserved. Transferred subject were to be administered by governor with the aid of minister. Okay? Governor with the aid of minister. Transferred subject. Responsible to the legislative council. The reserved subject, नाम से ही पता चल रहा है that reserved on the other hand were administered by the governor by his executive council without being responsible to the legislative council. The dual scheme of government was also known as diarchy, a term derived from Greek word diarch means double rule. However, this experiment was largely unsuccessful. It introduced for the first time bicameralism. Very important, bicameralism was introduced in 1919 Act. The and direct election in the country. Very important that it introduced for the first time bicameralism and direct election in the country. Thus, the Indian Legislative Council was replaced by bicameral legislature consisting of an upper house, that is Council of State, and lower house, Legislative Assembly. The majority of members of both the houses were chosen by direct election. So, ये act bicameralism and direct election को first time introduce किया. Thus, Indian Legislative Council replace हो गया by a bicameral legislature consisting of an upper house रहेगा, upper house में Council of State and a lower house Legislative Assembly like Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. The majority of members of both houses were chosen by direct election. Very important. Direct election से both houses का member choose किया जाएगा. It required that 3 of 6 members Viceroy Executive Council other than Commander in Chief were to be Indian. वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट दैट 6 मेंबर का वाइसरॉय एग्जीक्यूटिव काउंसिल था, उसमें 3 मेंबर अदर देन कमांडर इन चीफ वर टू बी इंडियन. इट एक्सटेंडेड द प्रिंसिपल ऑफ कम्युनल रिप्रेजेंटेशन. कम्युनल रिप्रेजेंटेशन जो स्टार्ट हुआ था 1909 में, वो एक्सटेंड हुआ द प्रिंसिपल ऑफ कम्युनल रिप्रेजेंटेशन बाय प्रोवाइडिंग सेपरेट इलेक्टोरेट्स फॉर सिख्स, इंडियन क्रिश्चियंस, एंग्लो इंडियंस, यूरोपियंस. सो पहले तो मुस्लिम के लिए बस था, बट अभी वो extend हुआ to Sikh, Indian Christian, Anglo-Indian and European. It granted franchisee to a limited number of people on the basis of property, tax or education. So first time franchisee दिया गया है limited number of people को basis of property, tax or education. It created a new office of High Commissioner for India in London and transferred to him some of the function hitherto performed by Secretary of State for India. Again, listen carefully. It created a new office of High Commissioner for India in London. London में एक new office create हुआ for High Commissioner for India and transferred to him and उनको transfer कर दिया गया some of the function इधर तो performed by Secretary of State for India. Comment below by which act Secretary of State comes into picture. It provided for the establishment of Public Service Commission. Very important. क्वेश्चन भी आया था दैट इट प्रोवाइडेड फॉर द एस्टेब्लिशमेंट ऑफ पब्लिक सर्विस कमीशन. 1919 गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एक्ट प्रोवाइडेड फॉर एस्टेब्लिशमेंट ऑफ पब्लिक सर्विस कमीशन. Hence, a central public service commission was set up in 1926 for recruiting civil servants. So, this was done by Lee Commission to the Superior Civil Service of India. It separated for the first time प्रोविंशियल बजट्स फ्रॉम द सेंट्रल बजट. सेंट्रल बजट से प्रोविंशियल बजट को सेपरेट किया एंड ऑथराइज द प्रोविंशियल लेजिस्लेचर टू इनैक्ट देयर बजट्स. एंड प्रोविंशियल लेजिस्लेचर को ऑथराइज किया दैट दे कैन इनैक्ट देयर बजट्स. नेक्स्ट, इट प्रोवाइडेड फॉर द अपॉइंटमेंट ऑफ स्टैट्यूटरी कमीशन टू इंक्वायर इनटू एंड रिपोर्ट ऑन द वर्किंग आफ्टर 10 years of its coming force. So, it provided for the appointment of a statutory commission to inquire into and report on its working after 10 years of its coming into force. Next, Simon Commission. In November 1927 itself, 2 years, so 1919 से 1929 हो रहा था after 10 years, but in November 1927, 2 years before the schedule, the British government announced the appointment of 7-member statutory commission under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon to report on the condition of India under its new constitution. all the members of the commission were British. So all the parties boycotted the commission. जितना भी साइमन कमीशन में मेंबर्स थे 7 members all were British. So all parties were boycotted the commission. The commission submitted its report in 1930 and recommended the abolition of diarchy, extension of responsible government in the province, establishment of Federation of British India and princely state, continuation of communal electorate and so on. To consider the proposal of commission, the British government convened 3 roundtable conferences 1930, 1931 and 32 on the representation of the British government, British India and the princely state. On the basis of this discussion, a white paper on constitutional reform was prepared and submitted for the consideration of Joint Select Committee of the British Parliament. The recommendation of this committee were incorporated in certain changes in the next Government of India Act 1935. So, साइमन कमीशन 1927 में 2 years बिफोर इंडिया आ गया था एंड इट कंसिस्ट ऑफ 7 मेंबर एंड ऑल वेर ब्रिटिश. सो इंडिया में सारा जो पार्टी थे ऑल वेर बॉयकॉटेड द कमीशन. द कमीशन सबमिटेड इट्स रिपोर्ट इन 1930 एंड रिकमेंड किया कि एबोलिशन करना होगा डायरेक्टरी को, एक्सटेंशन ऑफ रिस्पॉन्सिबल गवर्नमेंट प्रोविंस में, एस्टेब्लिशमेंट ऑफ फेडरेशन ऑफ ब्रिटिश इंडिया एंड प्रिंसली स्टेट एंड कंटिन्यूएशन ऑफ कम्युनल इलेक्टोरेट. To consider the proposal of commission, the British government convened 3 roundtable conference. Simon Commission के बाद 3 roundtable conference हुआ था of the representative of British government, British India and Indian princely state. On the basis of this discussion, a white paper constitutional reforms, very important, white paper constitutional reforms was prepared and submitted for the consideration of Joint Select Committee of the British Parliament. The recommendation of this committee were incorporated in the next Government of India Act 1935. Which was so important, which is very important. So communal award. In August 1932, Ramsay MacDonald, the British Prime Minister, announced a scheme of representation of minorities which came to be known as communal award. Again I am saying that August 1932 में Ramsay MacDonald, British Prime Minister, announce किया था एक scheme representation of minorities which came to be known as communal award. The award not only continued separate electorate for the Muslims, Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians and Europeans, but also extended it to the depressed classes, that is scheduled caste. Gandhiji was distressed over this extension of principle of communal representation to the depressed classes and undertook first unto the death in Yaravada jail, Pune, to get the award modified. At last there was an agreement between the leaders of Congress and the depressed classes. The agreement known as Pune Pact retained the Hindu joint electorate and gave reserved seats to the depressed classes. So 1932 में रामसे मैकडोनाल्ड ब्रिटिश प्राइम मिनिस्टर जो थे वो अनाउंस किए थे एक स्कीम फॉर रिप्रेजेंटेशन ऑफ माइनॉरिटीज. इसको ही कम्युनल अवार्ड कहा जाता है. द अवार्ड नॉट ओनली continued separate electorate for the Muslims, Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians and Europeans, but it also extended it to depressed classes, that is scheduled caste. And Gandhi ji ये opposed किए थे. So वो first किए थे unto death in Yaravada jail, Pune, to get award modified. At last there was agreement between the leaders of Congress and the depressed classes. The agreement was known as Pune Pact and retained the Hindu joint electorate, gave reserved seats to the depressed class. Thank you for watching, and next video I'll cover the Government of India Act 1935 and last 1947 Act. Thank you. Stay tuned.